everyone, welcome back to Be More, where we aim to inspire you to be a little bit more of every role within the Salesforce ecosystem. For today's episode, I'm joined by Rob Cowell, and we are talking about what it takes to be more developer relations. So, Rob, if you would be able to introduce yourself to our audience, please.
Thanks very much. Yes, I am indeed Rob Cowell. I am currently a DevOps advocate over at GearSet, and I've been there for about 18 months to 2 years now, which has flown past, which is a good space to be in. And the role that I have, DevOps advocate, does indeed fit in that umbrella term of developer relations, which we'll dig into in a little moment.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today. So, DevOps is perhaps, I guess, a main part of your role, and there are other parts to your role as well in terms of spreading the good word of Salesforce developers and perhaps trying to encourage more people to take up that role. So, if you were to kind of explain to us, I guess, a day in the life of your role in regards to developer relations, how would you describe that for us?
So I think there's an age-old saying which is content is king, and it certainly feels like that. In so much as a lot of my role, the lion's share of my role, is producing content. So whether that's blog posts, whether that's slide decks for webinars or in-person events, or like for example, today I wrote the introduction to one of our weekly newsletters. I did the first draft of a blog post. Soon I'll be doing a video series, much like yourself.
Hmm.
So it is all, a lot of it is kind of behind the scenes producing that content. So a typical day in the life is certainly sort of thinking about engaging content for other DevOps professionals or people that need to bring DevOps on board. So the interesting thing is that, obviously a part of my role is going to events, speaking at events, engaging with the community. But actually, events is the smaller part of what developer relations and my role particularly is about. But it's very much the public facing part of it. So people think that we just breeze from event to event, all
Yeah.
expenses paid. It is the curse of developer relations that people think that it's all about that. But in the time between those events or in preparation for those events, most of the time I'm sat here in my office, sometimes with my green screen, but writing that content, preparing those
Mhm.
slides, doing the research and building out demo orgs. So that's kind of the majority of the role there.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And kind of touching on that in terms of, I guess, the research that goes into putting the content together, I can certainly relate to that. And a little bit guilty myself of wanting to play with something and then suddenly it's a YouTube video and it's out there for the world to see. Is that a big part of it? Like in terms of learning is key because obviously things are for changing and evolving, and there's lots of different kind of tentacles to DevOps in particular. Do you think that's an important part of your role is kind of rolling up your sleeves and understanding it so then you can talk about it?
For my role in particular, or my, I guess, my implementation of the role,
Mm,
then yes, it is very much that keeping on top of the technical developments, making sure that what I'm talking about or writing about is topical, it's relevant, and it's useful. Okay, I can expound, and sometimes I do the thought leadership pieces,
yeah.
which are more sort of aimed at the sort of higher end, the decision makers, the influencers within a business, to get them to start thinking about implementing DevOps in their companies. But the majority of my stuff draws on my technical background. I was a Salesforce developer and architect for 12, 13 years. So, I lean into my strengths, which is a very
Mhm.
important thing to do in any Salesforce role. It's like play to your strengths. Challenge yourself, but know where your grounding is. And so,
Yeah.
because of my background is that sort of development technical aspect, I very much lean heavily into the technical aspects. And of course, to do that, you've got to be on top of each release. Even though I've kind of moved out of the hands-on implementation side of Salesforce, I do
Mhm.
keep my certificates up to date. For example,
Yeah.
I do bash out trailhead badges. I try and sort of keep up with the pace of evolution there. Now, what I want to go back to just briefly on there is I talked about, my implementation of this role, because there are many different ways to approach this. So here at GearSet, there's actually two DevOps advocates, so myself and my colleague Jack. Now,
Hmm.
Jack doesn't have the background as a developer, but he has a strong business and sales background. He was an account executive at the enterprise level before, and
Yeah.
so he plays to his strengths. He talks to the C-suite. He talks to VPs. He talks to those sort of decision makers about things like the ROI of DevOps and the collaboration features and how to build the successful teams and how to optimize those processes. And very much talks about the other half of DevOps.
Hmm.
And so it's very much sort of complementary between the pair of us. But it does mean that as a role, despite the name developer relations, you don't always have to be a developer or have a background in that to make a success of this role.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. And I was going to touch on that. And so I'm glad you mentioned about the relationship part of it as well, because when you are engaging with different people at different levels, dependent on whether they're technical or not, and their understanding and perhaps their maturity as well, you need to kind of adjust the way that you're speaking to them to kind of get your message across. So I'm glad we touched on that.
And I think that's important across so many roles as
Mm.
well. If you look at sort of project managers and product owners, sometimes they're talking to the business folks, sometimes they're talking to the technical folks, and you have to kind of be prepared to sort of meet people where they are and
Yeah.
sort of talk in that sort of common terminology and language so that you can convey that. Business analysts are another great group you know that have that as a high skill of being able to communicate at different levels and very sort of situational conversations.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so moving on a little bit, but we've touched on this already. Your role, the day to day of it, you're interacting with other people. What type of roles do you interact with on a daily basis?
Okay, so my role falls under the marketing team,
Mm.
which still surprises me, let alone other people, because with
Yeah.
such a strong technical background, I never expected to end up in marketing. And so, on a day-to-day basis, I do work with folks like from product marketing, content marketing. You know, we have our editor for our Launchpad, which is our online learning platform. The
Hmm.
social media team. The whole spectrum of that marketing team. It all kind of interplays with the initiatives that we're trying to do. But then growing outside of that, if I look sort of outside of the company, my target audience, the folks that I want to engage with are the developers and the architects and the admins that are out there. Now, again, playing to my strengths, I do tend to gravitate a little more towards the developers and architects
Hmm.
because I want to sort of deep dive into the nuts and bolts of things.
Yeah.
I have done presentations for admins because I want them to realize that despite the name DevOps, it's actually for everybody. It's not just for devs.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be gained by admins kind of getting on board with that way of working. But yeah, I mean, the wider Salesforce ecosystem, I want to engage everywhere. I think those decision makers, if they're
Mhm.
not already implemented or getting DevOps implemented in their teams, those are the folks that I want to be talking to about the benefits that they're going to see from that.
Yeah.
Business analysts, I want to talk to them to get that DevOps mindset, even at the requirements gathering level. Like, how can I break these tasks up into small, iterable, manageable chunks that means that
Hmm.
we can get that rapid feedback cycle on our changes and get greater throughput. And then obviously the developers are a slightly easier value proposition for them.
Yeah.
No developer wants to stay up till 2 a.m. fighting with a change set, right? You want to have the most efficient way of doing things. And I think generally architects get it. By the time you've reached the experience level of an architect, it would be quite surprising if you hadn't at least heard of DevOps, let alone implemented it at that point. So,
Yeah.
it is a little bit more around the, how can we refine, how can we tune our
Mhm.
processes that we may already have in place.
Yeah, totally. And I guess kind of leaning into that a little bit as an architect, but how can we perhaps make these processes we have around DevOps a little bit more efficient and how can the clients that I work with, or whoever I'm working with, like how can they see more value from what we're doing? I think that's kind of the architect type mindset. Would you agree?
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's drawing upon the architect experience to make life better for the teams that they
Mm.
work with. It's all about getting an optimal, scalable, reliable process. We look at the fantastic work of Salesforce's own developer relations team and architect relations team with their well architected framework, and those are the pillars that they constantly try and encourage people to adhere to. And DevOps is no different, right? Those pillars are equally applicable in DevOps as they are in sort of overall system architecture. Um, but coming back to what I was saying about sort of the developer relations rather than sort of something specifically DevOps, the role itself is very much an educational role. Okay, it just
Hmm.
so happens that the thing that I'm educating folks on is Salesforce DevOps. But if you look again at the wider industry, and I mentioned Salesforce's evangelist team, so we have the admin evangelist, the developer evangelist, and the architect evangelist. They've really gone in on this thing.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely that. It's a combination of engagement and education. So you know, if anyone wanted to sort of move towards this type of role, it doesn't have to be DevOps. It can be, anything around that education and engagement piece between developers and admins and architects, and the messaging that your employer wants to get out there.
Yeah, totally get that. And in terms of this role, I guess day to day, you're involved in a number of different internal initiatives as well. But your full time position and full time motivation is working in the developer relations arena, right? It isn't something that you kind of dip in and out of amongst other responsibilities. Like, for example, you might have a consultant that's also playing the role of an admin. In your role, you're doing this and working towards those goals throughout your working day, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, when I first started this role, well, just prior to starting this role, I was a freelance consultant. I was doing sort of, client engagements, development, architect, bit of both, just building
Mm.
systems from requirements. And so when I came into this role, I still had the tail end of a part-time contract. So at that point, I was doing like 3 days a week, like hands-on development. I was actually doing a quite a large org migration, an
Mhm.
org merge for someone. But it was like a one company had acquired another company, and they both had Salesforce. And
Yeah.
I'm sure many folks listening along to this episode will be familiar with that one. But then 2 days a week, I was doing this advocacy role and onboarding with my employer, and so it was quite a nice way to do it, sort of easing myself into the role.
Hmm.
And then I kind of went full time August 22. So so yes, I am now fully dedicated to this as my day job. Um,
Hmm.
I stress the day job thing because I do have a little side hustle, still in a similar sort of space actually. So I am currently writing a Salesforce DevOps book as well,
Okay.
um, independent of the day job. I'm not allowed to work on it in working hours. Um,
Yeah.
but yes, and it isn't just a marketing vehicle for my employer's product. We look at the whole space. We look at free tools and not free tools, and principles and mindsets and stuff like that. So yeah, I am very immersed in this space pretty much all day and all night.
You embody that kind of role, right? I guess that's another way of saying it. And I can certainly relate to having side hustles as well as as somebody that has a few within the
Yes,
community
sure.
too. So yeah, that's great to hear. So if we were thinking now about somebody that was looking to get into this kind of developer advocacy relations DevOps type space, what tips or advice would you give to those that are looking to get started? Like, do they have to have a certain background? What do you think works best?
Well, this is the question that I've been absolutely looking forward to, because it has been a journey for me as well. So I think, I'll talk about some of my personal journey on that, and I think hopefully that will kind of sort of go some ways to answering that. So I came into the Salesforce ecosystem way back in 2010. And I know there's folks that are probably thinking, oh, latecomer, I was in there since 2000. But 2010 was my point of entry. And I went to a few of the London Salesforce developer groups.
Hmm.
And back in those days, they were run by Salesforce. So Salesforce would have a representative there that kind of managed the group, which was a developer evangelist. Uh, Great chap by the name of John Stevenson back in the day. And I said to John, what is this developer evangelist thing? It sounds bizarre, but it also sounds like a lot of fun. And so he kind of broke it down for me and sort of what it involved. And at that point, I kind of knew that that was what I wanted to do. Um, but it was a difficult thing to move into. It's like, well, where do you even start with that? And again, a lot of people in the Salesforce ecosystem, regardless of their role, they see getting employed by Salesforce as the end state.
Mm.
And of course, I fell into that trap a little bit. I Many years later, I did interview with Salesforce for a developer evangelist role, which I didn't get. But actually, that much like when you attempt a Salesforce certification and you don't get it the first time out, the failure is the biggest learning. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I was extremely fortunate that the person interviewing me, who is a good friend and well known in the ecosystem, I said to him, "Look, I appreciate that I didn't get this role. Can you give me some feedback on what I need to go away and work on? Because I'm determined to be a developer evangelist or
Hmm.
equivalent.
Yeah.
Um, I just need to know where I fell down so that I can go away and work on that." Okay, and I got that feedback. So coming back around to sort of where this fits into, how do you get into that? Okay, there are a few key aspects. Okay, despite it being developer relations, you don't have to be a developer, as evidenced by my colleague Jack, who hasn't come from a developer background, but can talk to people, can engage with people, can network like a champion, can
Yeah.
speak the language of business and the language of finance very well. So there's that direction. Now, I came from the traditional developer route, and I think if you're going to do that, regardless of which of those two directions that you take, you really need to know your subject matter well. You need to speak with authenticity and experience. Okay, so that's a top tip. Secondly, we mentioned this right at the start of our conversation. Content is king. Okay, so
Hmm.
really refine and polish your writing skills, your speaking skills, your presenting skills across the board. And the best way of learning is doing. Okay,
Hmm.
so I was extremely fortunate that I was subcontracting for a technical writing agency. So basically, what would happen is large technical organisations would go to this agency saying, "Can you find us an expert on topic XYZ that can write a blog post, a syndication out to various publications?" And it was like ghost
Hmm.
writing these things.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of learned to sort of work with producing a draft, getting it edited, folding in those changes, getting the right what we call in the industry the tone of voice for that written content, and really kind of refining those skills. Equally, for the spoken part, community, community, community.
Yeah.
Right. So user groups and Salesforce community events such as London's Calling, French Touch Dreaming, a whole bunch of the US events like Midwest and all the others, they're always open for community speakers. Okay. The London Developers Group, for example, are crying out for speakers. If they don't get enough, then Keir Bowden talks again and again and again, and he will keep going unless
Yeah.
somebody else talks.
He's got
It's
a
a
lot to
running
talk
joke
about.
with that group.
Yeah.
But on a serious side, it's the perfect way to practice your public speaking to an audience that cares about Salesforce topics. You don't have to go out, and hit the main stage at Dreamforce on day one. You can work with smaller local groups, and it doesn't even have to be the London one. I mean, obviously, I appreciate not everyone's based there. It is one of the
Mm.
biggest ones. But if you've got a small group of maybe 6 to 10 people at your local user group, that's great. You know, you're under
Hmm.
much less pressure, and it allows you to kind of polish and refine and practice and feel confident with that public speaking. So I think those two elements are probably the biggest part. You know, it's the content and the confidence are the two parts, and
Yeah.
knowing your subject matter, and just believing in it. You know, and being happy to share that experience with people.
Yeah. I think that's good. So, kind of moving on, I mean, we've touched on it already, but if you were to think about your own journey and perhaps if you were to redo it, is there anything that you would change and do differently? And I appreciate that mistakes and failures are important, right? And we
Yeah.
need to embrace those and learn from those. But is there anything in particular that you would change or do differently if you were to start out again?
What? So we talked earlier about how I discovered the existence of this role in
Mm.
2010. I actually started doing this role in 2020. 12 years it took me. So if there's one thing I will change is I wish I'd have started this earlier. I do absolutely genuinely love my job as a
Hmm.
career path. I you know I needed to be a developer and at one point a product manager and various other things to get to where I am today. But
Yeah.
I definitely wish I could have contracted that journey and started this a lot earlier because I so enjoy the job. I love writing the content. I love meeting the community where they are at their events. Folks listening along will probably pick up on this already, but I love talking about what I do.
Yeah.
uh, and it's don't get me wrong. Developer was a role that I did for a long time, even pre Salesforce. I did that for probably about the same amount of time again. So I've been a
Mm.
developer since I was 23. And for those not following along, I'm now 50. So that's quite a while I've been a developer. Um, so I feel like I've reached the point where actually I want to do something different now. And as I said, I enjoy it so much. I just wish I'd done it earlier. So I think that's probably the thing that I'd have changed. I think I should have made that leap of faith and put that effort
Mhm.
into honing my craft a little earlier. But
Yeah.
absolutely no regrets now that I'm here.
Okay. Awesome. That's great to know. And for kind of flipping the question a little bit back to what we were talking about earlier, but to anybody that's perhaps looking to start out, what skills and attributes do you think it takes to do a role similar to yours?
I mean, there's skills and attributes are two very different things, and
Mm.
you know, I know amongst the developer relations community at large, not just sort of within the Salesforce ecosystem, there are introverts and there are extroverts. So
Yep.
while we talk about the confidence to do the public speaking and the attending the events and what have you, it seems very much a extrovert attribute. But actually, there's a lot of folks that will go up, they'll do that, and then they'll come back in again, and that's absolutely fine. It's there is a perception that all of us out there are extroverts, but it's absolutely not the case. It's the usual mixture you'd get in any career path. So
Hmm.
please, don't feel put off by the fact that it is an outward facing role, because again, when we talked earlier, it's 20% out there, public facing,
Yep.
attending events, 80% behind the scenes, preparing for that, writing content, producing articles and stuff, which is in the nice confines of your safe working space,
Yeah.
where you feel most comfortable. I spend so much time in this chair behind me, just sitting here at the keyboard. It is nice to get out sometimes.
Yep.
In terms of the skills thing, again, we touched upon that. It doesn't have to be, despite being developer relations, you don't have to be a developer, but you need to be able to come from an angle, right? Whether that's the
Yep.
business side, the engagement side, the community side, whatever, with a degree of authenticity. So I would say it's probably not a career path that is necessarily entry level, in so much as you need to gather a little experience out in the field, as it were, before kind of tackling this, because effectively you want to be engaging with your peers, right? You're going to be talking to people that are doing the job that you're supporting them on. And so to do that and to be able to have those conversations and be able to relate correctly, you do need to kind of have a background in either something technical in the correct space, or you need to understand the business aspects. So, for example, in my world, what can DevOps do for my business? How transformational is it? How much time is it going to save my developers? How much money is it going to save us because our developers'
Mhm.
time is saved? And
Yep.
this stone keeps on rolling. So it doesn't matter which of those kind of approaches you take, but you need to be able to be very authentic with that, I would say.
Yeah, and I guess have the experience to have a viewpoint on some of these things as well. I guess it kind of boils down to that, right?
No, absolutely, yeah. And be prepared to be wrong. In any trade.
Yeah.
I recently did a presentation at French Touch Dreaming around why rolling your own DevOps stack is uh, not efficient, or something to that effect.
Mhm.
And I very clearly stated that this is a viewpoint, this is an opinion. I would love
Yep.
to hear counter opinions when we hit the Q&A session. So sometimes it's quite fun to kind of play with the audience and challenge those conceptions a little bit, but be humble, be graceful. Um, you know, in any trade, I would say, but particularly something that's outward facing. A lot of these developer relations roles, there is a perception that you are the public facing. I wouldn't say PR spokesperson, but you are very much the public face of a brand to those developers and architects and admins a lot of the time.
Mhm.
So be on your toes, be polite, be respectful, be on brand, but don't be too sales and marketing.
Yep.
There's a reason those functions exist separately. In a lot of my presentations, I will introduce myself and where I work, and then that's the last time I mentioned my employer or the product,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it's all about engagement, not about pushing a product onto people.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's really good, solid advice there. And kind of on that note, and kind of maybe hinted at this already, but is there anything that you'd like to change or make people more aware of about a developer advocate type role? Like, is there a myth or something? But perhaps like the event thing is one that we've touched on already.
Yeah,
Is there anything else like that that you would like to kind of clarify for the audience?
yeah. I mean, like you say, we have touched on on the fact that it isn't all events and after parties all the time. That does happen, and it's very
Sometimes.
nice when it does. But yeah, it's not the mainstay of the role. The other, I think, main thing to kind of remember about the role is that you know it's it's kind of one of these strange roles that doesn't always have an off button. So when you're out and
Mhm.
about, you're at a community event, even if you're there under your own volition and stuff, you're still kind of representing your company. There will be, the social media aspect. People are messaging you, asking you questions because you've positioned yourself as that subject matter expert. So you kind of have to be prepared for that slight tweak to the work-life balance. But in reality, most of the developer relations folks I know do it because they're deeply, deeply passionate about talking to their folks and getting that message out and making sure that, everyone gets a better experience of whatever it is they're doing in their job.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So we need to wrap up the session now from a time point of view, unfortunately. But before we do go, is there a way for people to connect with you and your content? And are there any particular resources that you would like to kind of share for our audience to learn a little bit more?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got ways of contacting and resources for days, but let's
Yeah.
talk about some of the key ones. So, for those of you that are sticking with the platform, I am on X, formerly known as Twitter.
Mhm.
My handle is Rob Salesforce. Same as on Threads, although I struggle to remember to go and use Threads, but you will find
Yeah.
me on there. LinkedIn, Rob Cowell. I'm fairly easy to find. In terms of content, we have our company blog, so gearset.com/blog. A lot of our educational content is on our sister site, DevOps Launchpad/blog. And some of the course material on there I've also written. And yeah, there's a few other bits and pieces kicking around. On our YouTube channel, there's some of my webinars. But yeah, far and away the best way to find me is just type Rob Cowell Salesforce into Google or your search engine of choice. Other
Yeah.
providers are available. And yeah, you'll generally kind of surface a lot of the things that I've done.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time today. And hopefully, together, when this goes out, we will encourage people to be a little bit more of this role, developer advocate. So, thanks again.
Thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for tuning in to Be More with Tom Bassett. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave any feedback in the comments.